Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dr. Mara Noemi Lopez. I am the HSI Research Center Director at the University of Arizona, and I am working on leading many of the AZ HSI Consortium initiatives, including this Evidence-Based Practice Awardee webinar. So the AZ HSI Consortium was established in 2021. It seeks to strengthen the individual and collective capacity of Arizona HSIs to intentionally support conditions necessary for student success in Arizona. One of the consortium's programs is the Evidence-Based Practices, or EBP. The AZ HSI Consortium sought to create a community-informed process to identify, review, catalog, highlight, and share evidence-based practices within an HSI context that effectively moves the needle towards greater college access, persistence, retention, transfer, and degree attainment for students in Arizona. The EBP focuses on what works, for whom, and under what circumstances. This cycle, we recognize 3 awardees that we are very excited to highlight. One of which is Project Outreach FAMILIA, Forwarding Academic Mechanisms Integral to Learning in the Academy. We'd love for you to introduce yourselves. We want to hear more about you and all of the amazingness that is your project. Feel free to take it away.
Hi, I'm Dr. Cindy Trejo, and I'm the director of Project Outreach Familia. I'm going to pause here for Lupe to introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Lupe Gomez Weatherwatch, and I serve as the outreach manager for this grant.
And I'd like to say that we're the OGs. We started with this grant, and we are now in our 5th year of the grant. Project Outreach Familia works with 4 high schools, and we try to really strengthen that pathway to higher education, primarily for low income and for first-gen college-going students. These schools also tend to be in low economic status neighborhoods and have a high enrollment of Hispanic students. So one thing that we do that is really important is that we involve families. It's our privilege to work with families. We love the schools that work with us. They had to apply to be a partner. And so in their mini grant, they had to tell us that they wanted our support. They were really buying into strengthening that pathway for college, really improving the college going culture on their campuses. And so in order to meet this need that schools were saying they really wanted, and to also identify how we as the University of Arizona wanted to embrace the HSI designation, we had some visionary town halls. I did that with Dr. Marla Franco. And what we found out is that the communities in the campus community, but also the K-12 community, really said, what we want is to work with our local high schools and to engage families. And so that's the birth of this grant, the grant that I wrote and Dr. Marla Franco also wrote. And we were awarded that smack in the middle of the pandemic. And so I'd like to tell you more about the evidence of our practice and how we know it's working. And it really starts with the Title V Developing HSI grant that highlights that everything you do must be evidence-based. And so we had a bit of a perfect storm. And right now I'm going to sort of launch into a testimonial. That's how we communicate. That's how we tell our story. That's how we engage with families, with students, with the K-12 staff, and also how we present at local and national conferences. And testimonial is a research methodology, one that I use, but one that we also use in practice as a method of being culturally responsive with who we intend to serve. And so we had this opportunity to write the Title V grant. And at the time, there was this perfect storm. So I was in my doctoral studies in Mexican American studies. And I also was writing the grant, and also was somewhat new to the University of Arizona. And so coming from the K-12 world, I really wanted, number one, to make sure that we got the buy-in from the K-12 community. And number two, to make sure that those activities that we wrote into the grant were evidence-based. So for example, we know that in Pima County at that time, we had very few students participating in dual enrollment. And those who were participating in dual enrollment weren't always representative of the community that we serve. Secondly, so dual enrollment is a equity on-ramp of getting students ready for college, preparing for college, but also it helps really with their agency, feeling like they can do college because they're doing college, but they're doing it with the safety net of being on their high school campus. So Pima County at the time was offering very few, and at the time, 2018, very few dual enrollment opportunities. So that was one thing we wanted to do, is expand dual enrollment. The other thing that we wanted to do is to make sure that we talked about financing college, and also that we worked with the families. And so you can see here that we did have some growth in not only college enrollment, but also in the FAFSA completion. So the FAFSA, of course, being such an important application to take, because then the students can see that in many cases, attending college is feasible. And since we're outreach, of course, we say we'd love you to come to the University of Arizona, but for many families, it makes sense to start at a community college. And if they want to go to our other state colleges, we support them with that as well. So those are the goals of the program. The other thing that we do that's very unique, and again, that's very personal to me, is that we use a framework that I developed in my doctoral studies that really highlights not only Chicana feminist scholars and their work, their methodologies and their theories, but also indigenous scholars and their work and what they believe in. So with a Chicana feminist lens, we're always looking at how we do the work. Are we ensuring that we're making people feel comfortable in our sessions, making sure that we're making time to greet, say hello, make them feel comfortable with maybe putting music on, rearranging the rooms. So if it's a small group, we're in a circle and people feel welcome. And then also that we are vulnerable with our stories. I'm a first-gen college-going student. My father went to Pueblo High School up until the 3rd grade. I lived in the city of South Tucson. And of course, parents want the best for their student. I may have been technically low income, but I never felt that in my spirit, nor did my family reflect that to me. We had huge aspirations, as do the families that we work with for their children. And so this is something I share with the families quite often. My story was not this straight upward line in terms of college attainment. I had children. I worked while I got all my degrees. And that's not an easy task, but by sharing that with our families, they know that, number one, I'm probably more like them than not like them. And number two, if I can overcome some adversity, certainly they can too. And so that is one thing that we do in our workshops. When we present, we share a little testimonial. We tell them Spaces aren't always super welcoming for us, nor are they easy. Sometimes even the vocabulary and the logistics of understanding how to do certain things on a college campus can be very, very challenging. And there are, what we try to do at Project Outreach Familia is support them with that. So the evidence of what we implemented was really from the onstart. You know, we used a framework that I created in my dissertation. We used evidence-based practices, family engagement, dual enrollment, getting students early college experiences to come on campus and visits. And we always put a lens on it that makes them feel like they do belong in academia. And I'm going to stop there.
So one of the other things that we do is we work with families and we try to break some of the barriers and the myths that people have. We kind of bust those myths. We create an environment where we do them in Spanish and English. Sometimes we do Spanglish, and sometimes we do break it down so that we have one specific all in Spanish and then a workshop all in English. This, I think, allows the people in the audience to feel included, and they can speak in their native tongue and ask the questions that they're dying to ask. And some of those things, we make sure that we cover all the basics of what the college going process is in our workshops. We talk to families about what is the difference between a 2-year and a 4-year college. We also try to make sure that they understand the process of financing college. And I think, as Cindy's mentioned, Dr. Trejo mentioned, we start with a testimonial. And I think sometimes parents don't understand, or we assume that once the first child goes to college, that the other children should follow the same suit. So I often talk about my testimonial. I actually have two college students right now, and they're actually graduating this May, so that's exciting. But I share my story of being a parent to both of them and knowing that each child needed something different. For instance, my son went to community college. That was a better fit for him. He decided to work full time, so he didn't take as many courses at first. And my daughter, on the other hand, understood that, wait a minute, if I put my effort in making all this and getting scholarships, I may not have to work as much as my brother. So she decided to instead focus on scholarships, is at the University of Arizona, graduating this year. And that's why they're both graduating at the same time, but they had a different process. And I try to make sure that I tell parents, you'll support them either way, but know that they may have different ways of reaching their ultimate goal. And I think that kind of helps them realize that some of them have told me afterwards when I share my story that they appreciate me sharing the story because they were maybe too hard on their children. So I think that kind of helps demystify the myth that all of them need the same pathway. And then they also we share with them resources in the community and let them understand that, you know, we bring them on campus so they can see what the resources are and where they're located. And then we often have time, families are very grateful for that opportunity to learn about the resources, to learn about how they can support their child at home. I think sometimes they don't understand when they're studying, when they can't go to quinceañeras, bodas, or whatever comes up, that once they're in college, they understand that they need a different times to kind of study and focus and stay away from. That doesn't mean that they're not being part of the family. That just means that they have to prioritize their time. So I think that kind of helps us. We also share some of our stories. Like I share my story that I went to graduate school after I had my two kids, 10 years after I got my bachelor's degree. So some of them get inspired to want to go back to school after they realize if you went back to get your master's degree, then there's still a chance for me. So I think all the way around, I think sharing our stories with them, our testimonials, helps them understand that we're one of them and that, yes, our stories are different and we matter. And it's important for us to just, support each other, support our family through the process. And as I mentioned before, we always make sure that we emphasize que hablamos español, so parents can feel comfortable talking to us. A lot of times when they see my last name, they're not sure. So we make sure that they understand that they can always reach out to us, whether it be through following us in our social media or direct email or phone call, and we can get in touch with our families and students that way.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you so, so much for sharing. I feel like I'm in the work with you. I think some of the things that emerged for me is how personalized, how intentional, how meaningful every aspect of this work is, right? Being bilingual, I think, is sometimes like the go-to to connect, but you're sharing your stories as a way to connect too. And I think that that kind of emphasizes the power of testimonios, right? So I really appreciate you sharing that. And I wish I would have had some involvement in a program like this when I grew up in my rural town in Southern California, because I think that, being one of four maybe would have helped my mom. It might have helped my nana help her daughters. So thank you so much for sharing your story and your work. So we're going to kick it over to panel questions now. We have two panel questions for you before we wrap up. Our first is, so one of the criteria to be recognized as an evidence-based practice awardee is that you use evaluation and assessment tools to really demonstrate impact. So what kind of original analysis supports your work as an evidence-based practice?
Well, we again, when you start off, when I mentioned about the pandemic, one of the benefits of being, again, right out of getting my PhD and creating the work, I was creating the work in my dissertation with the hope of doing HSI work. And so I created this framework that embeds these scholars, and that framework allowed me to onboard the staff. And so Lupe was the original staff. I also was able to handpick a staff that was bilingual and knowledgeable about what we wanted to accomplish. And so in doing that, we knew that if you're going to work in community using evidence-based strategies, using methodologies that Indigenous scholars and Chicana scholars have used, then it was critically important to have the utmost respect of the communities we go to make sure that we made it loud and clear that the hierarchy was gone. We were not experts. They were also experts, that we were there in our workshops to co-create knowledge, that who has better knowledge of their children than the parents? They do. And as I share with my personal testimonial, low income never means low of aspiration or low in spirit. So really leaning in, the community cultural wealth that's there. And so when that framework is embedded in your staff, embedded in how you think and how you see community, then it really means that we're debunking the mainstream. Hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, and I'm from this big university and I know everything and you're just community members. It totally breaks that dynamic and says, we are here as part of your community. In my case, literally, Pueblo is one of our partners, and my father has given me stories. He was one of the he graduated with one of the first graduating classes of Pueblo High School. So that framework is our foundation because it is embedded with evidence-based practices. And then we use all the mainstream tools as well. After every workshop, we have feedback. But I want to emphasize that because we use these methodologies in action. It defines the how we do the work, and it also lowers defenses from our participants so that they feel very comfortable being authentic and asking questions that they might in a mainstream situation shy away from. So we have pretty live feedback of whether we're meeting the need of the community or we're not, because they'll say to us, either thank you very much, or they'll say, I'm not quite understanding this. Can you tell me how many classes is my child going to take? And are they going to be in class, all day, or what? They're not going to go to school on Friday, or they could just, so they're not afraid to ask questions that might be basic to someone who's already been in college.
So thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm trying to conceptualize all of this. And I think that your approach is really quite innovative. One, I can appreciate the importance of building trust and rapport. So we're thinking about how we collect our data, how we engage with our participants. Perhaps one could say that the traditional way academia would do is just to go into communities, take from the communities data, information, content, whatever, and spit it out into the research paper. But your focus was on building trust and rapport first, and then the task emerged procedurally as it would afterwards. So I think that that's really important to note, especially when you're working with members from collectivist communities, right? The other thing that I think is interesting is that you have this ongoing, fluid flowing method of data collection that informs the next iteration of your work, implementation, I'm assuming meetings, connections, which also breaks away from the traditional too, right? Because normally it's like a post survey, you review the survey, do a preliminary analysis, and then that survey data applies to the next thing, and then you do it again, and you do it again. And because you've built so much rapport, you're collecting rich data, experiential data, observational data, anecdotal data, ongoing. And I think that that's also a very holistic and organic and humanistic approach to data collection. So when we think about evaluation and assessment, to me, it appears to be, if I'm understanding it correctly, that you have a very innovative, very humanistic method for collecting that evaluative and assessment information.
We think so, and we appreciate you seeing that. Absolutely. And again, I think it goes to, and I had somebody call me on the traditional methods in saying maybe what's innovative is the traditional, right? Because if you mirror what we're doing, I identify, I'm Hispanic, I'm Mexican, identify as Mexican American. My family's been in Tucson on one side for many generations when this land was still Mexico. And so it's traditional for me to walk into a living room and give everybody a hug and say hello. And it's also traditional that room's probably kind of in a circle, whether it's somebody's living room or somebody's kitchen. It's inclusive of everybody. So the traditional way of doing things, maybe we say conventional, because I was doing that too, saying traditional methods are the way the mainstream does it, more of a Western lens. But when we say traditional, maybe traditional is leaning more into our culture.
Right, right. And the paradox between the academic culture and the collectivist
Yep.
culture and how we use non-traditional and traditional, right? So
Yeah.
again, I really appreciate this dialogue because I think that it's insightful, and especially for all of us researchers. And also just want to know what a beautiful thing it is that you, from your doctoral research, were able to formulate this project that is now 5 years ongoing, using frameworks, applying frameworks with that lens. That's also really inspiring because I think that sometimes with our doctoral research, it's like there's an endpoint. That was the thing that I did then, and yours is ongoing. So congratulations on creating some masterful work with all that experience. So we'll go on to our next and final question. So tell us about a time when you knew that your program really mattered and was really making a difference. And I just can't wait to hear how you respond because I can already I'm already getting emotional just thinking about it. So take it away.
Go ahead, Lupe. What you want to highlight I'll just say, let me say this bit about the parents because I think it's just so sweet, and then I'll let Lupe highlight her perspective. We have parents who come to us in tears after a Saturday workshop or an evening workshop because they say, we thank you for sharing a little bit of who you are, and thank you for making us feel like we do belong here. And I've had people say to me, I don't really know you, but you are from my community, and I'm really proud of you. Can I give you a hug? And so that's kind of those things that, like, how do you put that into an evaluation? But you're hitting the mark. You know that you're doing something bigger in that we're reframing and we're providing that counter story, especially in today's climate of who belongs in academia. If we're willing to do the work, we all belong in academia. It's not an easy route, but it can be for everyone who wants to do the work. And that's a big message. And I think what's the epitome of success for me is when we hear somebody that says, I'm a first gen student. If you wouldn't have reached out to me, I know I wouldn't have gone to college, but you were there and now I'm succeeding. So to me, that's the epitome of it's working.
And I'll share a story. I'll first kind of tell you the event that we had. So we collaborated with two STEM events on campus called Engaged and ASIMS. They actually provide services to support students going into STEM. Because we do offer the dual enrollment class, we wanted to make sure that we had an event that brought the students on campus, that allowed them to see what it was like to be on campus if they chose to be STEM. And then we also know from experience and research that students like hands-on things. They don't want to just hear people talk to them the entire time. So we made sure that we had a hands-on activity. They learned about acids and bases, and they created, excuse me, bath bombs. I need some water here. So the students really enjoyed that process. Excuse me. They got to interact with engineering students that were all Hispanic first-gen students. And then they had a student panel. They also got a chance to hear from the students the true stories. What were the challenges? What was great about college? And what advice they had for them. We also allowed them to do resource fair, but we make sure that we had questions for them, that they had certain questions that they would ask the resource fair, so that it wasn't just going and picking up free stuff, but making sure that they understood what the resources were available and how they could help them. So at the end of this, we were talking to them. We had a nice little raffle for them completing the survey. And I was talking to one of the students. I asked him, some of the things that we use, and we use ORID, and we want to ask them questions like, how did this make you feel today? What did you learn? What was more impactful? And he said, this is the first time that I've been on campus, on a campus tour, where I see people that look like me, where I see everyone welcoming and friendly. So, he said, that really made me feel that I belong here. And for us, that was wonderful because we purposely selected the people that were part of this campus visit to be welcoming, to be engaging. So to hear that from a student, we know that we were doing our part because we wanted them to know, yes, you belong here. And yes, maybe not the entire population looks like you, but there is a place for you here. And there's resources to help you succeed. So that was one of the things that to me always, makes me feel excited when I hear that from students. And even though I do this work, our children need our support either way, and their pathways are going to look different. if you have 1, 2, or 5 children. And just being flexible with the fact that if they say they change their mind about being a doctor, then you need to be able to support them. Because sometimes as parents, we forget it's not our dream and it's not our life. It's our role to support them and help them be the best that they can be.
I love that. Thank you both for sharing your personal stories, your impact stories, and how you apply your lived experience and that lens into all the work that you're doing with these families to make all of that impact and really changing the course of history for a lot of these families, right? I mean, helping parents reimagine how they parent, how they support, as maybe some parents have are first gen or have never been to college or are also just as overcome by all the all that being a college student entails. And I'm sure that having you both as a source of support, as a pillar of support, sharing your examples helps empower them too, so that they can also empower their children. So thank you both for sharing your story, for sharing your work, and for everything that you do. And like I said, I think that you are changing the course of history for generations to come with this work. So thank you so much. And we'll be posting this on our website soon. And be sure to add your contact information and ensure that people know that se habla español también.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.